I have an external fan from my computer, and it's quite hot here. My computer's starting to act up a little bit, so I'm going to leave the fan running and hope that the uh, background noise isn't too distracting. I may have to re-record this video at some point, but I'm going to try it with the fan running. So that's what the background noise is. Alright, so Hume makes his fourth point in the form of a question. Quote, and why not become a perfect anthropomorphite? Why not assert the deity or deities to be corporeal and to have eyes, a nose, mouth, ears, etc.? Unquote. Some people argue from human artifacts to the existence of a designer supposed to account for the universe considered as one great artifact, or as a collection of different artifacts, none of which are explicable in mundane terms. They do not, however, suppose that this designer is exactly like the people responsible for human artifacts. For example, they normally deny that this designer has a body. But Hume argues they ought not to do that if they want to be consistent. They should regard the cause of the universe's design as something in every respect like human artificers. Following a similar line of argument, Hume goes on to suggest his fifth point, and we'll stop reading from Davies' book there for the moment to respond to the fourth point. Uh, so Hume wants to know why we don't become perfect anthropomorphites, why we don't bring God down to our level, so to speak, because the idea is that the world is like human artifacts, computers, cell phones, etc. Although those weren't around, of course, in Hume's day, but they had other technological devices that were designed by humans. Well, the world is supposed to be like that uh, by being analogously designed by God. Therefore, God must be like human beings. So why not become perfect anthropomorphites? Well, I would turn that question around and say, why become perfect anthropomorphites? Why assume that God has to be exactly like us? Uh, I mean, when we talk about an analogy, an argument from analogy, the two things or the two beings that we're analyzing, that we're analogizing, they're not going to be exactly the same in every respect. Otherwise, they would be identical instead of analogous. So we don't want to say that an analogy is going to be perfect, or else it wouldn't be an analogy at all. It would be an identity. The morning star and the evening star um, are not analogous to one another; they're identical to one another. So whenever x is analogous to y, x is going to be like y in some respects, but not like y in every respect. Um, and beyond that, um, the, the idea of God having a body um, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because um, not necessarily from the teleological argument alone, but part of the general theistic picture is that God is the one who has created matter. He brought matter into being, therefore he cannot be made out of matter himself, or else he wouldn't be the originator of matter. Um, so I think uh, that really, uh, if we look at the Kalam cosmological argument, um, and the other cosmological arguments, uh, I think we can say that Hume's objection or Philo's objection really doesn't take that into account. Um, that uh, God is not going to have a body like human beings do, because human bodies are material entities. God is immaterial. Um, so um, that's enough to deal, I think, with the fourth argument of Hume. All right, so following a similar line of argument, Hume goes, and by the way, that the immateriality of God is one reason why we know that Mormonism is not true. Uh, Part of Mormon theology is that God has a body of flesh and bone. However, God created matter. Uh, Matter comes from the creative work of God, ex nihilo, and uh, prior to that time, prior, in quotation marks, because there was no time before the beginning of time. Um, Matter, since God created all matter, he cannot be matter himself. All right, so the fifth point. Hume goes on to suggest as fifth point that defenders of design arguments have no reason to disbelieve that there may not be a whole gang of gods working together to produce design in the universe. Quote, a great number of men, Hume says, join together in building a house or ship and rearing a city and framing a commonwealth. Why may not several deities combine in contriving and framing a world? Unquote. So, uh, again, we see Hume or Philo asking an interesting question, but it's a question that is ultimately irrelevant to the teleological argument. Um, if there are many gods, then atheism is false. If there are many gods, soft agnosticism and hard agnosticism are false. If there are many gods, then there is at least one God, and the argument proving the existence of a God is therefore successful. So I don't see why people continue bringing up this argument. Yes, perhaps there are multiple gods. I don't believe that. I think Occam's razor and the ontological argument, for example, would argue against that. But when we consider the teleological argument alone, sure, maybe maybe there's 5 gods, maybe there's 20 gods, but there's still a God. Okay, so you can't get around the conclusion of an argument by drawing out further implications of the conclusion. If the conclusion shows that there is a designer, a divine designer, then God exists. It's as simple as that. Well, there's one last objection that Hume brings up, um, and this one actually, I think, out of all the arguments, it actually is relevant to the um, teleological argument, and it's the idea of dysteleology. That uh, this is not, some would say, the best of all possible worlds that we are living in. There's suffering and so on, and there's disorder. Um, so where does this disorder come from? If the order comes from God. So we'll get to that in the next video. And actually, there's 2 other objections before that, so eight objections altogether. And hopefully, we'll be able to cover the last 3 in the next video.